Ever heard of a demon who tempts you with incredible fortune, but then laughs his way to the bank, leaving you empty-handed?
That's a new one. What kind of demon are we talking about today?
Today we're doing a deep dive into the story of Belphegor, but he's not your average, demon of sloth.
Oh,
Yeah. He's known for tempting people with invention, wealth, even morality. We'll be exploring his story through some really interesting sources, a YouTube video on demonology, and even, believe it or not, some texts on Jewish mysticism.
that is an interesting combination.
Right. Let's see what we can learn. This YouTube video we found starts off by saying Belphegor tempts people with brilliant ideas that lead to massive wealth, but there's always a catch. Like all that wealth has a moral price tag.
It makes you think of the classic Faustian bargain, doesn't it? It's fascinating how this concept of, compromising your values for worldly success shows up across so many different cultures and throughout history.
Yeah, it's a tale as old as time. But here's something I found kind of strange. The video also links Belphegor to the month of April. What does a demon have to do with a specific month?
Well, it might seem odd to us, but assigning demons to different times of year is more common than you might think. It reflects how ancient cultures tried to understand and maybe even control the forces they believed influenced their lives, right? The year, the seasons, even the months were all seen as having, spiritual significance.
Okay, so maybe I'll hold off on any big decisions in April from now on, just to be safe. Speaking of ancient cultures, the video mentions Belphegor's name might actually be connected to these ancient rituals where people would throw offerings into crevices. Offerings to a crevice. What does that even mean?
It sounds stranger than it is. The video is probably referring to Belpeor, who was a Moabite god. His name might translate to Lord of the Opening. And he was worshipped in the mountains. People often left offerings for him in, rocky openings.
So are you saying Belpeor and Belphegor are connected somehow?
It's not just a coincidence, if that's what you mean. This is where things get really interesting. You see, in demonology, it's common for older deities and their rituals to be kind of absorbed and then reinterpreted as demonic figures by later religions. It's like a game of telephone, but with gods and demons.
This whole idea of ancient gods becoming later demons is fascinating, but there's something about Belphegor's story that's kind of confusing. The video calls him the demon of sloth, but then it mentions stories from the Bible, like in Numbers 25, where he's all about sexual temptation. Did they get their wires crossed somewhere along the way?
That's a great question. And it shows how easily these stories can get, tangled up over time. When the Bible talks about temptation, it's actually referring to Belpeor, the Moabite god we were just discussing. It seems like over time, maybe because their names are similar or maybe because of how older gods were demonized, Belpeor's name became linked with Belphegor in some traditions.
It's kind of a raw deal for Belpeor when you think about it. One minute you're a god hanging out on a mountain accepting offerings, and the next minute, bam, you're a demon known for leading people astray.
It does make you think about how our understanding of these figures changes with time. And it reminds us that these stories are constantly being, retold and reinterpreted. What might seem like a straightforward story is often much more complex when you look beneath the surface.
It definitely makes things more interesting. Okay, so we've got ancient gods, biblical figures, and now we're adding Jewish mysticism into the mix. You mentioned Kabbalah earlier. Does Belphegor make an appearance there?
He does, but not in a good way. This is where we see a different side of Belphegor. In Kabbalah, he's not just about laziness. He's considered an enemy of beauty and a servant of actively destructive forces known as the Qliphoth.
Qliphoth. That sounds intense. What are they exactly?
Imagine a cosmic battle between good and evil. In Kabbalah, the Sephiroth represent the forces of creation and goodness. Think of them like a tree of life, nourishing everything with divine energy. The Qliphoth are the opposite. They're like parasites, trying to drain that life force, to disrupt the balance of everything.
So it's like a cosmic tug of war, and Belphegor is on the side of chaos and destruction.
Exactly. In this context, Belphegor's sloth isn't about skipping your chores. It's about actively opposing creation, about hindering growth and progress. It's a form of, you could say, spiritual sabotage.
Wow, that takes sloth to a whole other level. So in the Kabbalah, Belphegor isn't just tempting individuals, he's trying to disrupt the entire cosmic order.
You could say that. He represents the forces that want to see the world descend into chaos and decay. It's a pretty bleak picture when you think about it.
Okay, so we've gone from ancient rituals to biblical stories to a cosmic battle between good and evil.
Right.
My head is spinning a little, to be honest. What's the takeaway for our listeners? How do we avoid getting caught in Belphegor's web of temptation and cosmic chaos?
It's a question worth pondering.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's about renouncing wealth or ambition altogether.
Okay.
Remember, Belphegor tempts us with the promise of those things.
Right.
But it's the path we choose, the compromises we make along the way, that really matter.
So it's less about what we want and more about how we go after it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Belphegor embodies that seductive but ultimately empty promise of shortcuts and ill-gotten gains.
Yeah.
He's a reminder that real success, lasting fulfillment, comes from aligning ourselves with those creative forces, with those things that uplift and inspire, not from trying to drain the world for our own benefit.
It makes you think about all the stories we tell ourselves about what it means to be successful
Right.
and about what we might be willing to sacrifice in the process.
It's a question we all face at some point in our lives.
Yeah.
Do we take the easy road, the one that might seem tempting in the moment? Or do we choose the path of integrity, the one that aligns with our values even when it's difficult?
This deep dive has really given me a lot to think about. It's a good reminder to check in with myself and make sure I'm making choices that align with my own values, with my own vision of a better world, that I'm not, making deals with any devils, cosmic or otherwise.
Yeah. Perhaps that's the most important lesson we can take from Belphegor's story. The real temptation isn't about wealth or power. It's about compromising who we are at our core. And that's a price none of us can afford to pay.
On that note, we'll leave you with this thought. If Belphegor tempts with brilliant inventions, does that mean there's a dark side to innovation? Is there a point where the pursuit of progress of new ideas can lead us down a dangerous path? Something to ponder. Until next time on The Deep Dive.